Hey everyone, Joe here. This is part 2 of 2 with Isaac. You can check out the first one on our podcast or YouTube. I meant to get this one out on Saturday, but I do still have a full-time job and I have family, so sometimes things pop up. So sorry for the delay, but hope you enjoyed the second half. I enjoyed this full episode, so we'll see you next time. Wait, no. Enjoy the episode. I like you talk about like forgiving yourself, because I think that's something that can be easily missed. And that's something like I'm working with my boys on, is like my youngest, he got mad at somebody at school and he hit him. And we were like, that's not okay. He felt horrible. He apologized and he was crying at home. And us trying to find a balance between, this wasn't okay. There's going to be consequences. It's good you feel these feelings. Like if you were excited about it, I'd be worried.
Yeah.
But so we kind of talked through like, yes, we need to learn from this, but then also bring in, now you need to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And move on. Like, and it's a tough balance. And I think I struggled with forgiveness for a long time for myself. I mean, I used to be so disgusted with middle school Joe, because I would make up stuff when I was in middle school, just make up stories to try to get attention. And as I got older, I look back and I'm like, oh, that's because I felt so neglected. Yeah. I did anything I could do to get attention. It was a coping mechanism.
And this is probably this is definitely the advice I give for people who are writing stories.
Yeah.
But I think that also applies to life as well. And it's just that the most important question is why, right? So, and this is not to tell you how to parent by any means, but for me, I would start off by like, okay, why did you hit him? Right.
Right.
And I'm not looking for a justification, to a certain extent. If a kid's really nice and then decides randomly to hit the other person, there's a good chance they had it coming and they're lucky it wasn't Carrie.
Yeah.
So, the first question is why did you hit him?
Yeah.
Right. The second question is why did that cause you to hit him? Right.
Yeah.
That's the second question. And once you get to the core of that, you give them that better understanding of knowing who they are. And then you can work your way back up, right? Why did you hit him? Okay, why did you feel the need to hit him? Why did you hit him over something else? Okay, now we know who you are. Now let's build you up in a way that, can probably avoid the violence while still maintaining the aggressive stance that doesn't just allow you to get walked all over.
Right.
And, people like Jordan Peterson will be like, oh, well, you don't want to be too agreeable because you'll get walked over. And one of the lessons I took away from that, as a very agreeable person, who very much gets walked over, who's been walked over all the time, is that, you do want to be more agreeable. You do want to have all these traits that push you in the positive direction, but the ability to have these negative traits is a good defense against negativity. So when you need that, especially in defense of, if you need it in defense of others, it's good to be able to have it. If you need it in defense of yourself, you need to go somewhere else. But then pushing that positivity forward is absolutely the key aspect. And it's why so many people have such, not necessarily an easy time. Zack Snyder did not have an easy time with Batman, but it's why everyone has this difficult time with Superman. My Adventures with Superman, animated Superman show, absolutely phenomenal. But the things that they were able to do and still kind of allow him to grow in terms of how he learned to accept himself, but he was still able to be positive, and he was learning to accept himself. And then his friends who were allowing him to accept himself bridged that gap that allowed other people to accept him as well. But that shows, the difference between Batman and Superman is negativity fighting against negativity versus positivity fighting against positivity. And that's why they get along so well, because Batman so badly wants to be Superman.
Yeah.
And Superman wants to support everyone, but feels Batman's pain so much that he wants to be there to help him through.
I love that. Because, yeah, those are, I love the mutual respect those two have for each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's good. I like that a lot. And speaking of Superman, I feel like that might be a good intro to our final clip. So our final clip is from a great TV series. It's called The Chosen. What's kind of your history with The Chosen? And
I grew up in a conservative Christian household. My thoughts on religion, not my thoughts on religion per se, but my relationship with religion is more complicated than with any ex I've ever had. So, I'll let your imagination run wild with that one. But I will say that Christian media has had a very, very awful run. I mean, I'm a huge Narnia fan. I love the Disney Narnia movies, and they are awful. Harry Gregson Williams is the best part. I love his soundtrack there, and I love the Metal Gear series for that. We had The Passion of the Christ, which I actually never got around to seeing, but I just Mel Gibson does a good job with what he does. But we just have not historically had the ability to push that forward. People who are Christian, especially politically speaking, they tend to be more conservative, and personality speaking, they tend to be more conscientious. And so you're not going to have that same level of creativity in the spades that you will for secular media, that you will for Christian media. So you don't necessarily have the same resources, or at least the same ability to understand. I mean, the number of times I've been in a boardroom with people who just do not know who to bring on for a writing project. It's exhausting. So this show is written by a guy named Alice. I forget what his last name is. And let me tell you, if I were to put together a cast of dream writers, he would be on it. This show is thoroughly magnificent. And it doesn't matter what your religious affiliation is. It's a fantastic show. It is a show that is not trying to convince you to be Christian or anything. It's not shoving anything down your throat. So regardless of your view on it, it is a absolute must watch. It is a full dramatization of the events from the Bible. There are things, the Bible can definitely be dry. Its focus is on Jesus, and this show is called The Chosen because Jesus is not the main character. He is very much part of the backdrop. He's part of the settings, and we get to see the dramatization of all these characters and what they're going through. And as a fan of the MCU and every action movie he can get his hands on, when I'm feeling really, really physically ill and I have nothing else to do, I'll even put on a Jason Statham movie because they're all bad, but they're all epic. This show is so great despite there being no action, and it is just a character drama. It is thoroughly worth the watch.
Yes, I agree. Just the character development and the characters they put in. I mean, it is very. I mean, I grew up in a Christian family, and I don't love that it's kind of become the stories have kind of become what's the word I'm looking for? I've been desensitized to them, for lack of a better term, of oh yeah, this guy got eaten by a whale. Great. Oh, this guy let him out of the Egypt. Great. And just kind of, oh, he walked on water. That's pretty cool. But then when you see it, how they do it here, it's just and
well, when you play this clip, it'll definitely be very interesting in how the show did it compared to, the written text.
Yeah, definitely. So to set this up, Jesus' disciples, they're on a boat without Jesus, and in the distance, I was going to maybe play the whole clip, but it's so long and that makes it harder with copyrights stuff. So I'm not going to play the whole clip, but it's where Jesus comes out walking on water, and they do a great bit where they're like, it's a ghost, back up. And they find out it's him. And so he's calling out to him, and we'll play the clip and go from there.
Then come to me, you weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest.
Simon, no.
Simon. Don't be foolish, Simon.
Simon, wait. Simon. No, Simon.
Simon, Simon, where are you going?
What are you doing, Simon?
Simon, what are you doing? Simon. Do you still have faith? Faith hasn't been my problem. I gave up everything to follow you. But you're healing total strangers! Why do you think I allowed trials? I don't know! They prove the genuineness of your faith. They strengthen you. This is strengthening you. And Eden. Keep your eyes on me. Lord, send me! I'm sinking! Simon! 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 Help me, please! Don't let me go. Don't let me go. I got you. I got you. Don't let me go. I got you. Please. Oh, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Don't let me go.
That's just good story.
So to, throw the whole thing into context, there was, I want to say it was the first episode of season 2. They, all those disciples who are in the boat, are sent out on tasks to basically take powers that Jesus has given them and to go out and heal and preach the good news. And I think that it was it was one of the last episodes before the season where one of his disciples, who has a small limp, nothing that prevents him from doing anything. It might have been season 3, I forget. But he talks to some of the other disciples, and they're like, "Why haven't you asked him to heal? Why hasn't he healed this?" He's like, "Well, maybe it's because I haven't asked, but I know that he knows about the limp. But if I do ask, then I'm scared that he'll see that I'm not good enough to do this." So it's a really cool show, the way that it influences all of this. But one of the things that he does is he does eventually go up to Jesus and ask, not Simon, who was the character who fell in, but this other character, asked Jesus. He's like, "Hey, what exactly? Why haven't you healed this?" And he's like, "Well, think about all these other people who have had faith because they've been healed, and you, who has not been healed, have faith despite of it." And so that's definitely, a very interesting section of the show. Now, there are 2 separate Bible passages that this combines. The clip, a little bit longer, like you said, it's a long clip, and YouTube is very trigger happy. But there's right after that, Jesus just tells the storm to stop. And that's 2 different ones. One where he's sleeping in the bottom of the boat, and then there's a storm, and he's like, "Why are you guys panicking?" And he tells the storm to stop. It's like, "Let me go back to bed." And then there's another one where he walks forward on the water, and he calls Peter to walk to him. Now, the Bible is just a Bible story that's miracle based, that's Jesus focused. This is very different in the way that they do it. So his wife got pregnant, before he left on his ministry, and then she lost the baby right before he came back. And then when he came back, like their marriage was having issues, and she wasn't communicating with him, but he also wasn't really listening or anything. And then when he figures out that this happens, they end up going out and feeding the 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. And like during the time, he's just throwing a huge fit. And no one really knows what's going on except for one of them. And so all the disciples are trying to get onto him, but this one disciple is like running interference for him, but he also just does not care in the least bit. And it's interesting because I think that there's a lot of Christians out there who maintain a relationship with God. And I say Christians, any monotheistic religion, especially the trio that all come together historically under the same context, maintain this interesting relationship with God, because the Bible says that the church is the bride and Christ is the groom and God is the father and you should fear God and all this other stuff. And it creates this a series of weird dynamics. And so you have Peter, who has faithfully served as like a very too aggressive bodyguard, and throughout the series, and he's healing complete strangers, but he didn't save the baby. He didn't make sure that any of this other stuff was happening. Yeah. And so Peter starts off essentially angry at his friends. And that anger is what drives his faith. That's what's interesting, is that negativity, like I said before, is what's pushing against negativity. He's angry that things did not click into place, that everyone else's life is working out, except for the person who's been one of the most devoted people there. Mm-hmm. But then when he sinks in, he then curls up like a child looking for his parents. Mm-hmm. And so you see kind of that relationship change. And, the way they combined that all was great. But, one of the things I talk about in my narratives with the different levels of narratives, I use Abraham Maslow's needs as a way to sit back and say the character who needs something all the way to gaining a value, an immaterial value that helps them further in their life. That's usually represented by a material thing. But, it's that, he was very angry. Mm-hmm. He didn't feel, that level of connection. And when he lost that, he was angry. That anger was maintaining that connection. Mm-hmm. And when that anger started to dissipate, that connection started to dissipate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting, because we see that you have a positive connection will turn into a negative connection and then will disappear. And I think that's a big reason why holding on to negativity is such a big thing, because it's the only way to make sure that connection doesn't just vanish. Mm-hmm. And that connection, vanished in a certain way that went down a level. And once that connection disappeared, that faith just dried up and he sank. And the only thing he could do was be concerned for his safety. He was no longer angry. His fear just completely kicked in. Mm. Yeah. So, it's been interesting. And it was interesting to see that woman was his wife, who, was trying to reconnect with her faith with God after this issue. And so it was like they both went into the water at the same time, or that's the way it's illustrated, for her to gain her faith as he went into the water to lose it.
Wow. Yeah. So, so much to unpack, so many layers, which is awesome. And I love the layers. I also I feel like I come from like a couple things I liked. I'm like, before I think about the faith aspect, I kind of like this idea of when Simon's trying to step out in faith, everybody in the boat's like, what are you doing? No, stop. And I feel that can happen with us, especially with people who are taking a step out to do something risky and scary, to go pursue a career in writing, to pursue a career in something. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, is that really a job? Is that, and being willing to take that step out. And it can be scary and you might fall on the way, but, and then I also really like it because this scene really shows about why, I kind of became a believer, because in the end, this is my vision of who Jesus is. Somebody who's like, hey, I want to come forward. I want to challenge you. And hey, if you fall, I'm going to hold you. I got you. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool.
It is very frustrating that the world basically sets up this failure state like an 80s video game, and that's something that in the narrative design space is a very highly coveted skill, to where you're able to understand a video game as the individual parts. And when you're able to understand a failure state, not as a you're dead, good luck, go back to the last checkpoint, and life kind of operates as a there are no checkpoints, but boy, you're going to get freaking close. It's exhausting because it doesn't have to be that way. And it's one of those things to where, and I'm not a political person by any means. You won't see me take sides. I don't care which side you're on. If you bring up anything political, I'm gonna be like, okay, you're probably an idiot. Goodbye. Not always, but probably.
Yeah.
But for me, I fully believe in this idea of technology being a huge buffer and benefit for us. And for me, it's just about how do we make it to where that failure state is easy enough to where people can have that ability to step out and to fail without feeling like the entire world is going to fall down on top of them and crush them. Because without that failure state, or without that, protection of that failure state, that's the second story. Is the character needs to feel safe in order to have agency and take control of their own lives, in order to develop a willpower to push through difficult situations. But if they don't feel safe, they won't have that willpower. If they don't have that willpower, I can't even begin to fathom the technological progress we would be at if protocols were put in place to allow people that safety.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Just that, seeing as becoming friends with failure, I once heard. And I like that. And this is kind of random, but I think I can tie it in. So one thing I found with failures too, is if I own them, they can become strengths. Now this, like I said, this is kind of a stretch because it's not really a failure on my part. But so yesterday we went out with my wife to Panera, and we got dinner there as a family. And I was like, oh man, something just hit me. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go. So I ran in, went into the stall, went to the bathroom, did my business, and then realized there was no toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, this is awkward. This is the only stall in here, so it's not like I can sneak to the next one and get some. So I text my wife and I'm like, we're out of toilet paper here. Could you help? And she's like, yeah, I'll talk to the staff. I'm like, okay, great. Well, and a couple of minutes later, I hear a knock, and then door opens and I hear a girl go, I got toilet paper here. And I'm like, oh.
This is a story they're gonna put on the wall.
Yeah. I was like, yeah. So I got the toilet paper and I'm like, I could leave it as me being mortified of what happened. Or I could leave it as that was actually kind of funny. Like and own it and tell it and add a little flair. And that's why I think that with failure is you can owning it, I think will make other people feel comfortable. I mean, when I was a manager, we had Failure Friday. We'd all talk about our failures because I wanted to normalize. It's going to happen. And we don't need to hide from it. Actually, we can teach each other from it. And we did. And we cut down errors greatly because people were saying, oh, I got this and I messed up like this. And then other people were like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do that today. Thanks for the heads up. So yeah, love that failure message. So I kind of want to,
it all depends on how it's defined.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things to where I have redesigned this formula a number of times. I anticipate it'll be redesigned by somebody else when I finally say I am done.
Yeah.
But to me, I don't know if those are failures as much as they are just like little tweaks or fixes.
Yeah.
And so, that definition is, I think, a big part of it. And that definition is not only something that's external, but also that we internalize, right?
Yeah.
There, for me, being able to fix up little things for myself is very different than me failing somebody else that then shatters the perception that I'm capable of doing something. And that to me is always harder to fix than the internal of like, oh, well, I messed this up. I can fix it here. We're good. Nobody ever knows about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So something I'm going to do to put you a little bit on the spot, but also kind of not. So we just watched these 3 clips that have some, like, in the end, it's just kind of about 2 characters connecting. I'm wondering, as kind of somebody who studies stories, if you are up for talking about what similarities you saw in these writings, or what were big differences, or anything that kind of, just using your expertise to kind of commentating on all these 3 as a whole.
Well, I think that you said you're going to put me on the spot, and I think that you're like, ooh, let's see if we can challenge them. Let's see if we can get them. But this is not a terribly difficult question, and I say that not necessarily to be like, this is easy next, but to say that like there is a reason why story works the way that it does, because there are all these similarities and connections in who we are and what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a game called Set. I'm not sure if you've ever played. It's a little card game, basically there are 3 shapes. There's a card, and on the card is a shape. Mm-hmm. And there'll either be 1, 2, or 3 of that shape. It'll either be empty, filled in, or have lines drawn through it, and it'll be a certain color. And your goal is to find everything that's similar or different. So you can pick up a card that's like, you have to pick up 3 cards. And so it can be like, there's 1 triangle, 2 triangles, 3 triangles. They're all different numbers, all the same shape, all the same fill. And story kind of works something similar in the fact that like it's not just the similarities, but also the contrasts that are very interesting. So this is obviously about connection, and it's about connections that are very different and very unique. So Bluey was about establishing a connection that was coming together in the future. I've never been a big fanfic person. Like, obviously, there's nothing wrong with it. But, I study story, and I help consult with original stories and stuff like that. Though I'm not big into, like, shipping characters or stuff like that. I'm a big believer in canon. So, like, the MCU for me, I'm always like, what's the canon aspect of it? But one of the very few exceptions that I make is that idea of shipping Bluey and John, which is so weird that I would pick a kid's show to do that with. It's like borderline creepy. But that's testament to the writing. But that's something that's a connection that's made in the moment for the future, right? Then you have Arcane, where you have Jinx and Vi, and it is trying to bring back Powder, and that's a connection in the moment that is trying to pull from the past. And then you have the moment between Simon and Jesus, and it's a connection that's trying to stay in the moment. Have faith in me at this moment. Don't take your eyes off me. In fact, I think that was actually really what happened was when Simon got distracted by all the ways. I don't think that was in the show. I think it's just in the Bible, where when he gets distracted on the ways and he takes his eyes off of Jesus and his mind wanders, that's when it happens. And so it was about staying in the moment. So it's obviously about these connections, but each of the connections bring something that represents just the complete flow of time, from trying to create a connection from the way things were, creating a connection to establish the way things are, to being able to just live in the moment.
That's awesome. That's a good, that's good. When you brought that up, I was like, I don't know if I can do it, but it sounds like you can. So I'll just move over.
Well, I like coming on podcasts where I can talk about stories and stuff because I can sound smart. But if we were to actually like pull me onto anything else, like I'm just sitting here to listen. That's it. Yeah. So, I'm glad I can show off in the one thing I'm good at.
Well, no, that's awesome. And I love that you are studying how story impacts. I don't know if that's fair to say, but in the details of story, because to me, like, story is like, that's how I teach lessons. I use stories.
Yeah.
And I will bring up so many TV shows to illustrate points. And one thing I always point to is the power of a story. Since we were kind of just talking about Chosen, I brought this up in a podcast, and it was, so like, I think the best demonstration of power of a story is in the Bible, David, when he's king, he takes Bathsheba to be his wife, kills her husband, just does some not cool things. And so God's like, hey, prophet, I want to say it's Samuel.
I think so.
And he's like, hey, you got to go talk to your boy. This isn't cool. Yeah. So Samuel goes to David, and he's like, yeah, so there's these two people. One guy has tons of sheep, all the sheep. He's got everything he wants. This other guy just has one sheep. That's it. That's all he's got, and he loves for it. And the guy who has everything took the sheep from that guy. And David was like so mad. He's like, whoever did that, he needs to be punished, and just furious. And then Samuel was like, that's you, that guy. And just like it hits Dave. He's like, oh no. So I think stories can create such good reflections and such great like meaning, and it can help us figure out who we are.
It's funny because, you talk about, I use stories to teach. One of the things that drives me absolutely insane in the branding world is that they will come out and they'll tell a story and they're like, here's how it relates to what I really wanted to say. And I'm just like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
So I'll run through an exercise with somebody and I'll be like, okay, we're going to talk about your product. I'll use myself as an example. I teach branding classes and I say, okay, well, I want to know what emotion you feel about your product, right? Okay, I want to know what behavior you feel, what belief you feel, and what value you feel. And these are all categorized. So like I'll give them a list. So emotions are, joy, generosity, trust, or excitement, all positive emotions within those 4 categories. So like for me, it's I love teaching story because the deep emotional connections it makes builds communities that really help raise your business up. And, I categorize all that. I love is joy. Teaching is extroversion. Creating those connections is the imaginative thought pattern about pulling things together that most people don't see. And then, that raises your business up. It's a benevolence value. So it's how do you create the best version of something that you can? So I'll do that. And then I'll be like, okay, well, think about your consumer, right? So what is it that you feel like they need? I'll give them a list of those 7 needs, and I'll give them a list of 7 values, and I'll put together the story. And, then what I'll do is I'll take the product narrative and I'll put it in as the resonance, that middle part of the story, and I'll connect it all together. So for me, it's businesses will compete on price and on features for market share. But then I'll come in and I love helping them craft their story because it helps them create deep emotional connections with their consumers, with their clients that builds a community around them and helps their business grow in terms of value and longevity. And it gives them this sense of love and care for this community that helps them develop the future of their company.
Yeah.
And that's the story that I'm there to tell. And it's not like, oh, I'm going to give you an example story and then pull it into what I really want to say. It's the ability to break that story down into the components and then put something together right here, right now with you, with me, and all this stuff. And so it's you talked about the power of story to inspire and to move. It's definitely has that. And that's definitely the big thing because creativity can be so hard to latch onto all these other things. But story is not just about creativity. I have a section in my story for creativity, but the business side is not the creative side. It's just story for business. It's just branding. It's taking the stories right here and right now. And so each section in my book utilizes that core of story that's not just about inspiring. It's not just about motivating, though there's a lot of that. The emotions motivate. The behaviors are in action. The belief is, why did I do this? Oh, because it's going to get me to my value, what I need most in this moment.
Yeah.
And so for me, stories are about the ability to immerse, relate, and engage. And those three things are what we can do inside creativity and outside creativity by understanding this stuff. And so, it's cool to be able to teach by telling a story and use that to inspire. But, especially people who are far smarter than me, will eventually be able to plug this into education better than I could. For me, it's a question of saying, hey, what is it? How can we motivate you? How do you feel about this? Okay, you feel negative about this. Why do you feel negative about this? Okay, well then let's remove that thing that's causing this negativity. Let's then say what would motivate you. And then we can add that in and create a positive side. And then we can create a positive connection with something. Like some kid who's like, I'm no good at math. I can't do this. I can't do that. And then, come to find out they're slaughtering in StarCraft. And you're like, this makes no sense. They're running complex strategies, but they can't figure out what 2 + 2 is. Like, what? It's one of those things I like to tell people, like, hey, do you want to hear a story about a rebel who teamed up with his friends and family in order to fight off an oppressive empire? They're like, yeah, I'll go get tickets to Star Wars with you. I'm like, no, I just was talking about going to history class and listening to George Washington crossing the Delaware. Like, why on earth is this so difficult? So, it's inspiring, but it's also understanding.
Yeah, I like it. And I don't know, I might be totally off. I kind of have this idea while you were talking that in a sense, like we're taking time to look at clips to find meaning. Sometimes the story or clips we need to look at is our life, to be like, oh, what's really going on here? Like, oh, it's funny you were saying, like, with the examples you were given, because I struggled in high school, but I had a US history class where the teacher used The Simpsons to teach. And I got an A on that. I ended up tutoring other kids in it because of it, because he had me connect with something. And so just that idea of, there are reasons. Just like in stories, there are motives behind characters. There's reasons that we kind of act the way we do. There's, I get super afraid of conflict because of my upbringing. And actually I always say what I actually get really scared about in conflict is there's a story. So a comedian was doing a joke about Mike Tyson. He's like, why does Mike Tyson need 2 bodyguards? It's like, well, I figured out one of them is to protect Mike from you, but the other one is to protect you from Mike. And, that's one thing I get scared of conflict is I'm like, what if I lose my temper? What if I lose? And I just, and so like understanding that mentality has helped me be better at conflict, to be like, hey, I want to make sure we're civil about this, and kind of seeing it as a story. It makes sense.
Well, and talking about anger and anger issues and anything like that, I think that one of those things is that you have a relationship with that, right? You have a relationship with that anger. So you have a relationship with someone and you're angry about it, but then you have a relationship with that anger and that fear is there. And so if you start by being excited to be angry, because it allows you the ability to communicate with what you want. If you no longer then, when you're not negative about it, you're positive about it, it doesn't control you. You control it. And then you can be angry. You can be aggressive. You can stand up for yourself and you can be like, hey, I am going to beat you half to death. But I really want you to have the opportunity to run away and let me cool off. You've got this sense of I'm in the right here and I'm not going to let you off easy, but I'm in full control. And that is significantly more scary than anything else.
Yeah.
When I was working on my narrative structure, there were 4 words that popped up over and over again. And these 4 words were internal, external, active, and reactive. And they were so frustrating to me because everything about this structure was to walk away. And I'm a huge Jungian. I love Carl Jung. I love Joseph Campbell. I love the archetypes. But they're too... And that's not to say that my stuff isn't, but I wanted to go archaic, but I still wanted to be literal. Is not the right term, but it's the only term I've got right now. I wanted to walk away from just the metaphors. I wanted to walk away from stories to tell stories. I wanted to use facts to tell stories. And so for me, these words were still just like, I couldn't put them into something that was concrete. And then I came across the idea in psychology of an attitude. And I modified that. And that's where I have emotion, behavior, belief, and value. And I divide those up because Robert, I can't pronounce his last name, but I'm going to try anyways, Plachuk, developed the idea of emotions. The big five, the MBTI, those are aspects of behavior. Jill Taylor and Ned Herman did what I used for the belief system. Shalom Schwartz was the guy who I used his value structure for that. And I organized all this stuff together. It became a whole lot more concrete. But for me, it all came back not to story, but to memory. And that's how our minds play out. At the end of the day, every single memory that you have is going to be something happened to you. You had an emotional reaction, and then you did something because you believed it was going to get you closer to what meant the most to you in that moment, whether that was negative, whether that was positive, whether it was rational, whether it's irrational. That's what every single one of your memories is made of. And if you can sit back and write a story based on what you've written before, you can plan your life out's future, and you can understand your present by looking back and saying, I'm going to no longer let my story control me. I'm going to control it.
That's beautiful. That's awesome. And I one thing I really like that you said, and I'm not going to quote you perfectly, but you were talking about like, there's the creative part. There's the creative part, but then there's like the facts and looking at that. And it reminded me of, I had a data analyst on here, and we were talking about, she sees stories through numbers. She loves doing data analysts because you get a bunch of random numbers and then you can tell a story, and it's like, you can back it up with evidence. And it's just cool how at the end of the day, like, her and I are doing the same thing. We want to find meaning in something. She's finding meaning in numbers. I'm finding meaning in shows. And so I like the idea too of using that same concept, just like you were saying, like, you can do this, so why can't you do this? Of, we look at stories, we learn from them. We can do that with our life. And I love how you kind of brought, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it kind of feel like it brought all three clips together of looking at the past, present, and looking at the future.
Well, and so I am going to write a section of my book based on what this friend of yours does, because that is a very common thing. And I'll probably message you to get in touch with her about that. Please. Because that section terrifies me to no end. I am not looking forward to that part. But I want to be able to write about how my structure affects all these areas, and then allow people who are significantly smarter than me to be like, this guy's an idiot, but he was on the right path. Let's fix all that up. So I'm going to have so many errors there. But, talking about past, present, and future, you have to recognize, the way that these memories work. I'm not a big fan of that entire time as a human construct, because I've gotten too many gray hairs in places that there shouldn't be any hair at all for that to be the case. But at the same time, I know that I've personally been stuck in time loops. I know that I have developed this ability so much so that I can see past, present, and future in the same moment. And it's not like I have some kind of time traveling ability. It's the fact that I can map. It's the fact that I've been stuck in memories before that are so bad that I can transpose those memories into daydreams and imaginations and in the moment, and I can live all of that at the same time. And it is migraine inducing for sure. But it's your emotions, behaviors, beliefs, and values color your memories. They tell you how to make decisions now, and then they imagine a future that you want to have based on the memories, and it's all connected through story. So it is, time and story are, I don't want to get too metaphysical, though I will, I'm definitely going to think about this for the rest of the night, but time and story are deeply connected in that way, in our memories. Yeah.
That's awesome. I always ask this before I get to a couple speed round of questions. Is there anything else you want to cover that you don't feel like we covered so far?
There's nothing in particular that I can think of. I enjoyed the ad lib. I enjoy,
Yes,
we're doing a podcast. We're also just hanging out. So if there's something
exactly.
that we want to hang out again with,
Yeah,
we'll see where that conversation goes. We'll see how many conversation it takes for us to go real crazy.
that sounds good. Okay, so I got 3 questions for you. Now I'm differing it up a little bit because we had a little different format. But my first question is, of the 3 clips we watched, which clip did you feel like you appreciated the most?
That's hard. I'm
Uh-huh.
gonna say Bluey. I'm gonna
Bluey.
say Bluey. I've watched Chosen the most recent, so that definitely has me on the most emotional high because I'm more
Mhm.
familiar with the Bluey clip. But
Yeah.
I definitely have personal experiences and desires for that aspect of Bluey. So no, 100% on the Bluey one.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Bluey one is just there's sometimes where there's just this perfect like hammer and nail where it's just a one hit. And I kind of felt like that where it was just a quick scene, but it was packed with
Yeah.
story. Uh
Yes.
my second question is, if you had to take one of these clips and just deep dive into it, like analyze the heck out of it, which clip would you want to look at?
Arcane.
Arcane?
And the reason why I do Arcane is because outside of BoJack Horseman, Arcane is one of the densest shows you are ever
Mhm.
going to watch.
Yeah. I would agree with you again there because I feel like with The Chosen, that'd be a cool one, but I'm like, there's so many commentaries written already. I'm going to stick with that
I I mean, The Chosen would be a fun one to dive into
one. Mhm.
if you were willing to buy the book that was taller than you were, that dived into all the cultural and biblical and other things. But, one of the things I love about The Chosen is that it's not about Jesus. It
Mm.
is not. And that's great because we've got enough material on him and everything
Mhm.
else. And I consider this just because this is how I operate entirely. It's not healthy. I consider that show to be canon.
Mhm.
100%. Even though we don't have the records for that, that's how I see it because
Yeah.
that is how people operate. I have an entire
Mhm.
section of my book, which is also not a section I'm looking forward to, on anthropology and sociology, with this
Mhm.
entire idea that once we learn how someone can be tracked through time and space, what it means to be human, how they walk through these stages, how culture walks through these stages,
Mhm.
we can probably recreate a lot more accurate picture of things based off of the tools and items that we found based on the people who made them and what we expect they could feel and stuff. So that'll be really cool. So it's really cool to see, but it definitely is not as dense as Arcane.
Yeah. That's I can see that for sure. So my final question is, if a business came to you and they're like, we like these 3 clips,
Hmm.
and I'm going to pick something that's in front of me because I know it'd be hard to make
Yeah.
a pitch if you didn't have what the product was. But I am going to just pick something close to me and I'm going to say Sunkissed. Sunkissed came to you and they're like, you know, we watched that podcast. That other guy was a little dense, but you were great. We loved you in that, Isaac. Uh, and we'd like to work with you. We're looking for a feeling, a story to go with Sunkissed. Which one
Mhm.
of those 3 clips would you use if they're like, we have to use one of these 3? Uh, would you be?
So, it's interesting because you're like, well, I'm going to pick something in front of me because you need that. But I didn't actually need anything. My first thought
Oh,
was, I'm going to put together an intimacy story because all 3 of those were about some type of connection. So I
yeah,
would immediately, without a product, put together the intimacy story, which is they need to see beauty in the world and in others and connection. But competition is rampant, and so there needs to be some level of intimacy with someone or something that allows you to create connections instead of competition, and
yeah.
then feel the value of love. Now,
Mm.
when you bring in actual Sunkist, and I would say that like Pepsi got in trouble for trying to pull this very similar tactic
I
off.
already
So
know
you
what
know
you're
exactly
gonna
what I'm
say.
talking about. You know. So it's a little challenging to pull off
Yeah,
when you're dealing with it culturally, but they were to say that these are the clips that inspire us, I would not utilize one of those clips because again, it's not one of my
yeah.
favorite things to do, to
Right.
Like, let's tell a story and be like, here's how we connect this.
Yeah.
But it would be, along that line, I would definitely say, hey, you want to develop an intimacy story and you want to develop an agreeable story, right? So it would be generosity, agreeable, emotional, and achievement, right? So, people are going around exhausted, trying to compete with everybody else, trying to get ahead. But you guys come in and just say, it's okay to be you, and to come in and be gracious with people and to connect to their emotions, not all their work and everything that they've done that they think brings value, but to connect to their emotions, to who they are, and then to teach them how to win by being who they are. And through that, they can connect with others who are similar instead of having to feel like they have to outpace everyone else, connecting to those who understand them and do that. And so if you put together a story like that, where you say sun kissed, you got two people who are like competing in everything. So like if I was to make a commercial, and let's just talk Bluey, the first thing that came to my mind is like, hey, they're playing cricket or not cricket. I think it's squash. They're playing squash, right? There's a scene of them playing squash, and then there's a scene of them typing faster, and you can see they're like close, or like brothers or best friends, and like one starts doing something, and the other one looks over and then tries to do it faster, and then there's a sun kiss that's brought by, and they drink that, and they start to get along. So that's the type of commercial that I would put out.
That was brilliant.
So, but to answer your question specifically, I would pick Bluey for two reasons. Reason number one is because you show me the color of that can, and the colors are so vibrant.
Yeah.
And that's very much Bluey. And then the second reason is because, I thought Bluey because of the colors. And then my first thought was like squash. That's a part of Bluey.
Yeah.
So all those connections, I would pick Bluey for if they really were like, yes, but we really want this.
Yeah. You've got a gift.
Again, I can do one thing really well, and I'm just trying to figure out how to apply it to things I don't know anything about.
Well, it works well for you. So I want to give you some time to kind of let people know where they can find you, anything you're working on you want to talk about, anything that's important to you want to kind of promote for yourself.
My name is Isaac Phoenix. My business is The Creative Continuum. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't have a lot of social presence right now. I will be working on that soon enough, and I can, hopefully we'll go from there. So if you guys are watching this at a later date or come back to this at a later date, you can find me at those spots. I've got a long to-do list, and I've got a long to-do list because the thing that I want to do is impossible to do until I do the previous thing on my to-do list. But that's impossible to do till I have the previous thing on the to-do list done. So, I'm selling these classes. I'm really excited to get that business off the ground. And then from there, I'm going to work on growing my social media presence. I'm being able to take what I've done and be able to start talking about this stuff on my own social media pages and stuff like that. And then start applying this stuff with AI. I love the archaic atmosphere of story that we've always had, combined with the new age technology that we're developing now. So there's so many things I could talk about, but that is in and of itself a whole podcast. And I'm trying to focus on the business because I'm a big picture type of person, and I will 100% get carried away.
That's awesome. Well, when you start doing great things, as I tell everybody, don't forget your old friend Joe. And I'd love to have you back when you do stuff like that, so we can get word out there and just celebrate everything you're doing.
We've talked a lot about my research and we've talked about my business, but I love coming back to the creativity side. I love being able to walk away from the research and the business and just come back to the creativity side and have fun. I want to come back to that. But no, being here, it was a huge joy just because I get to come back home.
Awesome. Well, it was such a treat having you, and I mean that. I'm so grateful you were willing to jump on and share your vast knowledge with me. And this was great.
Thanks for having me. I loved it.
Yeah, me too. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will see you next time.